Hello friends, welcome back to Dungeon Design in Zelda. For this series we have already completed all 4 of the Divine Beasts. However, there is still one more of what I consider to be a main dungeon to do before we head to Hyrule Castle. There's a lot of debate about what to call this. Some consider it the 5th Divine Beast, but for the sake of this video we're going to be referring to it by the closest thing to a name given in-game, the Final Trial. But before we jump into that, there is a lot to do before we even get to set foot inside, more than any of the other Divine Beasts combined. So, let's hop right into it. After completing all 4 of the Divine Beasts, we'll be called back to the Shrine of Resurrection, where we first set out on our adventure. Here we'll receive the One-Hit Obliterator, an extremely powerful weapon that, well, can defeat any enemy in one hit. The drawback is that while using it, you can also be killed in a single hit. There's a series of 4 challenges with 4 additional shrines to complete using the One-Hit Obliterator. These can be pretty unforgiving, but they aren't unreasonably hard either. After finishing these 4 shrines, 4 new monuments will appear around Hyrule, one near each Divine Beast, which will each show the location of 3 new challenges, which all unlock new shrines. So combining this with the 4 on the Great Plateau, we have to complete 16 new shrines that weren't in the base game. The challenges outside of these shrines are a bit more interesting than the shrines themselves in my opinion, as they don't feel very distinct from the existing 120, but the One-Hit Obliterator challenge as well as the Champion Trials that exist outside of these shrines are pretty interesting and fun. They can range from defeating a hard boss to snowboarding through a series of rings under a time limit to having to sneak back through the Yiga hideout. These all culminate in a rematch with each of the Blights, but in each case we're given a limited loadout of equipment, making these boss fights notably harder than the first time around. The reward for defeating each Blight again is an upgrade to each of the corresponding champion abilities, significantly reducing their cooldown rates. We also get some pretty nice cutscenes that give some perspective into the champions' lives, which is nice to see. Overall, I have mixed feelings about this lead up to the DLC dungeon. There's a lot of varied and interesting things to do, but also a lot that feels like just more of the same. Going through more shrines and fighting bosses that we've already beaten, well, it can feel a bit stale. I do feel like the rewards provide enough incentive for me to still recommend it, but I also think that Nintendo could have done better with this. The new shrines really start to feel like they're blending in with the rest. It's a shame because when I stop to examine them individually, they are actually among some of the better shrines in the game. But even still, they just don't stand out because it's the same cookie-cutter Sheikah aesthetic with the same shrine music and the same architecture. You get the point. Still, I enjoy these challenges. The Moldu King, this battle against a bunch of Guardian Skywatchers, and the little obstacle courses they take you through are all pretty fun and interesting, so it's a mixed bag. I do think 16 is a lot of shrines to get through though, and that gripe could have been mitigated if they all provided spirit orbs. See, by the end of the game, if you've completed all the shrines and Divine Beasts, you can have either maxed out hearts or stamina, but not both. Adding more shrines could have felt more justifiable if they also gave you the right amount of standard spirit orbs and allowed you to max out both stats. But aside from the first 4 during the One-Hit Obliterator challenge, they instead give you these Divine Beast emblems, which look just like spirit orbs, but aren't, leaving one of those stats still incomplete. It just feels like a missed opportunity to me, but alas, I'm getting sidetracked. So with those challenges, 16 shrines, and 4 boss fights out of the way, we can return to the Shrine of Resurrection again, which as it turns out also doubles as an elevator, taking us straight down into the dungeon. This is the final trial, As I mentioned before, people often refer to this place as the 5th Divine Beast, and it's easy to see why. The overall structure of this place looks and feels a lot like the Divine Beasts, and it clearly combines elements from all 4 of them. Even the map screen says Divine Beast controls when referring to the dungeon manipulation gimmick, a trope that has been carried through each Divine Beast, but is notably absent from the base game's one non-Divine Beast dungeon, that being Hyrule Castle. We'll come back to this idea in a bit though. From a level design standpoint, this is still a bit varied from what the other 4 have done. The final trial is segmented into 5 unique sections. The central chamber, where we'll find the map, and 4 cylindrical rooms that branch off from the central room, each with mechanics pulled right from the 4 Divine Beasts. Rotating cylinders and connecting a circuit, just like in Naboris, navigating a rotating walkway and bringing an orb back through a dedicated track, just like one of Rudania's core puzzles, navigating through the wind, not unlike what we have to do with the various updrafts aboard Meadow, and raising and lowering water levels, which actually Ruta never had us do that. But hey, this is still water themed, like Ruta was. So there's that. Overall, there is a sense of finality to this dungeon. Many classic final dungeons such as Ganon's Castle, Ganon's Tower, Skykeep, and even the Moon from Majora's Mask do this sort of recap in which ideas that were established in the game's various dungeons are revisited here in the final dungeon. So it is fitting that the 4 terminals are locked behind puzzles inspired by the 4 Divine Beasts. Not all the puzzles are one-to-one. That would be boring if it was exact repeats of what we've already completed. So rather than going for replicas, it's more like creating new, unique puzzles inspired by the themes present in their respective Divine Beasts. The overall structure and layout plays into Breath of the Wild's openness in a fairly balanced way as well. Fittingly, the 4 sections off of the main room, just like the 4 Divine Beasts themselves, can be completed in any order, though obviously there is a sort of implied order based on how easy it is to reach each section, but you're not forced to complete them in any specific sequence. Each section is like a small linear path in itself, with a specific puzzle to complete. So in a sense, these are 4 small linear sections that make up the components of one larger non-linear dungeon. Hope I'm still making sense. I like this balanced approach actually. I also appreciate that there is a good balance here between puzzles and combat. While each side room is pretty much exclusively puzzle focused, the main room has loads of enemies, more than each Divine Beast combined. They spawn in waves after activating each terminal and consist of uncorrupted Guardian Scouts, a Guardian Turret, and even Skywatchers. From a combat perspective, this is the most challenging dungeon yet. The downside here is that the puzzles here don't quite feel so interesting. Like each of the 4 is only scratching the surface of their potential. None of them really push you to your limits or test your brain. Maybe it's because I'm going into this right after completing Naboris, which I love, but it just feels as though all of these puzzles are a little too on the simple side compared to what that Divine Beast had to offer. Perhaps this could have been mitigated by simply having each of the 4 sections expanded upon further instead of limiting them to what is essentially a single hallway with a single puzzle each. If they had taken the amount of floor plan added into some of those shrines and instead included them as part of this dungeon, then perhaps that could have alleviated this. I just feel like the meat of this DLC is the lead up to the dungeon when it could have been the dungeon itself. Fact is, this place just isn't very big. From an architectural standpoint, this one is a bit different. It still has the same Sheikah architecture as usual, but rather than roaming freely around Hyrule like the Divine Beasts, this dungeon is deep underground below the plateau. In that sense, it feels like this one is a combination of the shrines and the Divine Beasts, especially in how it ends with an ancient Sheikah monk, just like the shrines do. There's still a lot to make it feel like a Divine Beast though, and there's even some exposed cave walls and what appears to be some natural lighting, rather than the fully enclosed shrines which are lit completely artificially. The final trial is also the least organic feeling one yet. There are lots of large gears and mechanisms, and the overall shape of the dungeon is not based on an animal. Creating a champion even states that the Divine Beast concept was born out of the idea of making each dungeon sort of like a character in its own right. But that can't really be said for this place. It doesn't feel like a beast, but rather something more industrial. Now, I am no mechanic, but I've seen the idea put out there that the dungeon is based on a combustion engine. I personally know nothing about engines, but sure, with the cylinders here, I can see that. It makes sense, especially taken as foreshadowing for the Master Cycle being the reward here. A theory I've heard that ties directly into that idea is that the dungeon itself is the literal engine of the Master Cycle, and that it gets shrunk down when given to us as a rune ability. There's a lot to unpack with that theory, and while it sounds pretty cool, it just feels unlikely. The dungeon is tied too closely to the Shrine of Resurrection for that to feel right to me. As for my own belief on what exactly this place is, I would refer you to this video made by Monk Maz. I have spoken at length with Don and gotten his blessing to cite him on this, so I'll summarize what I feel is relevant to the theory here and expand on it with my own thoughts, but I would encourage you to please go watch his video on this dungeon if you haven't already. It is incredibly well made and goes into great detail about the true nature and purpose of this place. But the gist of what you need to know in context of this video is that this is a training facility. Creating a champion all but confirms as much with the very tiny mention of the final trial that exists within the book. This place is meant to synergize the champions, to train them to work together as a team of 5, the 4 Divine Beast pilots and the Hylian champion that wields the Master Sword. Of course, the Divine Beast pilots are all dead at this time, so Link is somewhat forced to complete this trial on his own, while his allies accompany him in spirit. Literally. This theory just makes a lot of sense, considering the segmented nature of the level design here, the idea being that each champion would complete their respective puzzles and activate a terminal, essentially training them in how to operate their own divine beasts, while the Hylian hero would train against the swarms of guardians in the central chamber to prepare for close quarter combat against Ganon. Considering what their respective roles are, with the Divine Beast pilots being recruited as support, while the hero has to get close with the Master Sword and deal the final blow against Ganon, this brings a sense of context as to why the dungeon is structured the way that it is. It simply wouldn't make sense to have as interconnected a layout or puzzle design if these puzzles were meant to be completed by a team that splits up, rather than one person. Segmenting them just makes sense in that way. The downside is that I find it overall a little less fun and interesting, and a little more like doing a checklist. But I guess I can't fault them here for designing something that is different than the structures of the other Divine Beasts, especially with how often I say variety in dungeon design is a good thing. Something worth a quick mention is that the item pickups found in the various treasure chests are all equipment related to the various races of Hyrule, and just happen to be the exact materials used to craft the champion's weapons. Not that I've ever had to replace them, since I just hang them all up in my house. This does feed into this theory though, that this was meant to train and provide equipment for the champions themselves. The Shrine of Resurrection being attached to the facility makes sense too, since even though the enemies in this training facility are not corrupted or impacted by Ganon's influence, they can still inflict very real harm on the people meant to be training here. So having a medical facility on site, just in case, isn't a bad idea. The music here is a bit different. It's a new remix of the shrine music that builds and grows as we make progress. Of course, the music building upon itself is what all of the Divine Beast themes have done, but there is never a sense of tension or unease here. This actually makes sense though, since the final trial, like the shrines, are untouched by Ganon's influence, so the creepy, downright haunting vibes of the other Divine Beast themes simply wouldn't fit here. Aside from that, it is a more dramatic version of the shrine theme, and in my opinion, a better one, since the instrumentation feels a bit more dramatic and robust. The typical shrine theme serves its purpose well enough, even if it gets a bit repetitive after hearing it 136 times. But that theme has always felt a bit hollow and mysterious, which is by design, sure, it works for that. But for the final trial, they wanted something that swells and feels full, and this piece just nails that. Truthfully, I had to set aside some bias here while writing this. I've played this game a lot, start to finish probably 8 or 9 times, and I've heard the shrine theme a lot of times. So initially, I was ready to rag on this piece for being too samey, but giving it a good honest listen for this video, it is actually a pretty great piece of music taken on its own merits. The choir voices, strings, and percussion that were absent in the regular shrine theme really shine through here. It adds a lot to this piece. When it picks up in pace after activating all terminals, that simple increase in tempo makes the pre-boss anticipation feel really palpable. It's good stuff, and admittedly a piece I've never given enough credit to before now. Alright, let's go over the progression here real quick. There isn't exactly an entryway or foyer, so we'll be stepping into the central chamber as soon as we exit the elevator here. There is a lone guardian scout to swat aside, and in the middle of this room is the guidance stone, which gives us the map. Rather than the usual 5, there are only 4 terminals to activate, but as I mentioned before, they can be done in any order, so I'll of course cover them in what feels most logical to me based on how accessible each area of the map is and how we traverse this place. I'm also going to exclude mentioning each of the combat breaks here because it's just fighting a bunch of enemies between each terminal. Nothing too noteworthy. Terminal 1 can be found by heading up this ramp near the elevator on the west side of the room. We can unlock this chamber by using magnesis to connect the gears here, which will cause the cylinder to rotate continuously, much like in Naboris. Through some tricky use of magnesis here, and by changing the rotation direction, we can complete these axles and, by extension, the circuit puzzle in this room. This unlocks the gate at the far end of the chamber so that we can access and activate the terminal. Terminal number 2 is in the chamber directly opposite this one. We'll need to use these gears as a platform to reach the entryway, carefully navigate this spiky rotating walkway, then complete this little physics puzzle to get this orb out from this rotating track on the far wall. Then drop the orb in this little track so that it rolls into its slot, just like we did back on Rudania, and the enclosure with the terminal will open up. 2 down, 2 to go. To reach the last 2 terminals, we'll need to get to the second floor of the central chamber by once again climbing these gears. The third section can be reached by using stasis to complete this puzzle, which pulls up this platform, which sort of combines these 2 puzzles from Varuta. Use Cryonis to push this button and get the platform rotating. Ride up to the walkway, use stasis to smack a faucet, lowering the water level, then use a metal ball to raise the water back up, and then using Cryonis, we can reach terminal number 3. The 4th side chamber can be reached by, again, connecting the gears so that this entryway rotates continuously. There's a large fan in this room, and by changing the direction that it spins, we can influence the wind direction. We'll want to use the paraglider with the wind at our backs to reach these platforms, then use stasis so that the fan doesn't shred you, and glide over to the final terminal. Once all terminals are activated, the great door at the far end of the central chamber will unlock, so we just need to connect the central gear to it to open it up, revealing the Sheikah monk whose voice we've been hearing throughout this questline, Monk Maz Koshia. We can approach him as we usually do with the other monks, but instead of granting us a spirit orb, he has one final test for us. And heck, he moves! He'll teleport us away so that we can begin the boss fight. find ourselves being warped to this massive arena floating over Hyrule, where we'll be confronted by the dungeon boss. It's Monk Maz Koshia himself, and this actually beats out Thunderblight as my favorite boss in the game. From a visual standpoint, he's nothing to write home about. He's a self-mummified Sheikah monk, just like the rest that we've seen throughout the adventure, but his combat style is the most diverse and interesting we've seen yet. There are also 3 distinct phases to the fight, unlike the usual 2. He attacks using a mix of ancient Sheikah tech, Yiga-like techniques with moves that reflect foot soldiers, blade masters, and even some of Koga's moves as well. He uses Thunderblight's dashing attack, and he can make duplicates of himself, grow to an enormous size, and shoot lasers out of his face. He wields the Phrenic Bow and a variety of elemental arrows and a Guardian Sword Plus, and he uses all of these to great effect. This guy is tough as nails, but it never feels quite as punishing as Thunderblight. The sheer scope and variety of this boss fight is frankly unparalleled and makes it super fun to do. It's too bad because you can actually go and do infinite repeats of the Blight battles, but you can't challenge Maz Koshia to a rematch once he's defeated. Missed opportunity there. Alright, let's break down those distinct phases. The first part of the battle is rightfully the most straightforward. He'll rush you with his sword or use his bow to attack you. It's a one-on-one duel with him essentially matching Link's own natural abilities. When he uses the Thunderblight dash, the timing is actually a bit different here, making it a little more difficult to consistently parry or perfect dodge, but it is still doable. When he uses this attack to cause an updraft, it also gives you a perfect opening to use your bow and unleash a flurry of arrows. Otherwise, it's basically careful 1v1 sword combat, which I kinda love. The second phase of the battle kicks in once about a third of his health is down. It's pretty similar to the first phase, with the distinction being that he now starts making those aforementioned duplicates of himself. All the duplicates have the same moveset as him, so you could be trying to dodge one while another rushes at you with their sword and another tries to snipe you with his Phrenic Bow. Urbosa's Fury in particular is a pretty useful ability for crowd control here, if you can find the time to charge it up properly, since it'll disperse the duplicates, leaving only the real Maz Koshia behind and vulnerable to attack. Otherwise, I haven't really found a reliable way to distinguish the duplicates from the real one. They all look and behave the same, making this a pretty tough part of the fight if you aren't good with taking on multiple enemies at once. The good news is that the duplicates can all be dispatched with a single strike, so it may at times be a matter of simply weeding through the crowd until you manage to hit the real one. That third and final phase kicks in once he's down to about half his health. At this point, there's no hiding among clones. Instead, he grows to an enormous size, tries to shoot lasers at you, stomp on you, launch these spike balls, and more. He'll still call in the duplicates, but at this point, since they're so easily distinguishable from the real thing, they're more of a nuisance than anything. As far as taking him down goes, he's open to attack at all times. He isn't wearing armor or anything, so you can continuously strike him to chip away slowly at his health. But the best thing you can do is go for headshots to get that bonus damage, or wait for a chance to successfully parry a laser beam, which will deal a significant chunk of damage as well as stun him, temporarily leaving him vulnerable. This may all sound easy in theory, but his attack pattern is truly unpredictable, and the man has a lot of HP. This is by no means a short fight either, but I love it so much. To be honest, it's kind of refreshing overall. I mean, the 4 blights are fine, but they start feeling really samey despite their difference in attack patterns. By contrast, Monk Maz Koshia is such a breath of fresh air. It's a fun and exhilarating fight all around that truly tests your combat skills. I would be remiss if I didn't touch on the boss fight music here too. It is the best combat theme in the game. It's unreasonably good. It includes the usual trappings of piano contrasted with synth, some string elements sprinkled throughout, and there is something about that main beat that is just so good. It perfectly embodies the atmosphere of this battle. It remains tense without making the old monk feel evil. I love it. Once the fight is complete, Maz Koshia will yield, stating that you've completed his test, proclaiming you the true hero. With all doubt erased from his mind, he grants you access to the true 5th Divine Beast, a vehicle fit for our hero, the Master Cycle Zero. Yes, a freaking motorcycle. God, I love this game. So that's the dungeon. After this, we get a bit of exposition with Cass, another memory cutscene with the champions at Hyrule Castle, and we get this nice photo as a memento. What a lovely end to this DLC campaign. So overall, I have some mixed feelings about the final trial. From a lore standpoint, the implications are pretty cool. The music is great, and that boss fight is honestly top tier. However, looking at it from a level design standpoint, it is sort of underwhelming. It feels redundant with its use of architecture, the puzzles are creative but all rather short and simple, and the enemies are all ones that we've fought numerous times before. I get what they were going for, and in many ways, it does remind me of the ground floor of Ganon's tower in Wind Waker, which also had a central room with 4 branching areas that revisit mechanics from previous dungeons. But that feels more forgivable in my eyes because it was only the first third of that dungeon, not the entirety of it. Ganon's castle in Ocarina of Time did the same thing with its first half, just with more segments. But again, that was only the first half. So do I think this dungeon is bad? No, but I just think it's a bit underwhelming for how segmented and simple it all is. The fact that Naboris, one of the previous Divine Beasts, which is mandatory to do before we can even do any of the DLC, is more interesting and challenging is kind of a shame. This feels like it was their opportunity to really reel us back in with something new, but instead they fell back on just making more of the same. But man, that boss fight is so good that it actually makes up for it. The fight against Maz Koshia is my favorite boss in the game, just for how varied and unpredictable his moves are, and how fun he is to take on. So it's a mixed bag. Simple, uninspired dungeon layout, easy puzzles, but an amazing boss battle. Couple that with all the rewards that you get along the way for this questline, including upgrades to your champion abilities and of course the Master Cycle, and overall you have a solid DLC pack that is still very much worth doing, even just for that boss fight alone. Thank you so much for watching this video. Before we end this off, I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you to my patrons and channel members, including, but not limited to, Greymage, Brenda, Tetra, Callie, Gail, Hylian Wes, Justin, Clifford Longhead, Midnight Naomi, and Bunny. Thank you all so much for the support and for watching, and I will catch you all next time. Bye-bye!